Hey, in this video I will show you exactly how I paint a more complex image. Stay tuned because we'll go through the main steps. My name is Victor, I'm a concept artist, I work for film and games, and I'm really excited to show you guys the final result. So, let's get started. Alright, we're starting with a very simple warm wash on top of our canvas, so we're not working on an empty white page. And because this is quite a heavy architectural image, there are lots of elements, we want to be a little bit more precise this time. I'm putting down a very simple perspective grid, right? Just a 2-point perspective. It will help you, it will guide you through the whole drawing phase at least. So you don't have to be too strict. It's not a technical drawing after all, it's a painting, but it really helps, you know, to avoid some wobbly feeling whenever you eyeball things without a perspective grid. And another thing is that it's not a very complex structure, it's just a bunch of boxes connected with some walls, also like pyramids on top. So it's not that challenging, but it's important because it's going to be the backbone of your whole painting, so you might want to put a little bit of attention into making the structures more solid. That's why it's really essential to gather your reference images. The main reference for this one is the Karstein Castle in Czech Republic. It's a really awesome castle, that's why I gathered a bunch of references for color, for materials, or for lighting, and we're gonna follow them, guide the main decisions based on those. Okay, awesome. Now let's continue with the painting process, and the principle is very straightforward. I'm usually starting from the background, the sky, I'm thinking with the flat value, and I'm moving closer to the camera, right? So we have all these elements and you want to create shapes out of them, fill them with just flat color. It doesn't have to be very accurate right now, we'll fix that later. You want to fill them on separate layers because you might want to adjust them later, or maybe expand or shrink or maybe move around, so it really helps when you're figuring out the composition in the beginning. I personally have lots of layers during the painting process, and when I'm about 70, maybe 80% complete, or I'm close to completion with the image, I collapse them all and then I paint on top. Okay, next thing you want to solve is what's up with your light source. In this case, I figure it's going to be on the left side. So on the layers I created, I'm blocking in the areas that are in shadow. The values are not accurate at first. We're going to change them later on. So for now, we just want to describe the form and show where the light is coming from, show what's going to be in the dark. Something that I really want to maintain is this like cool contrast between the messier, sort of like noisier edges of the vegetation and the emerging castle, the emerging buildings out of it, with full-on like mechanical, straight, very sharp edges. So we need to keep that contrast for sure and kind of play around and maybe kind of work with our focal point to emphasize that as well. Okay, so after we did a quick pass for the shadows of the greenery, the trees below the castle, you know, going back to the building and figuring out those smaller details that we left out, right? The windows, other things that are extruded and things like that. Yeah, we want to cover those as well and kind of connect them with the main shadow layer that we had in the beginning, and all of this is going to kind of describe the form quite well. We're going to know exactly where to place details, where to place the shadows. And the arrangement of these windows sometimes is very asymmetrical, so I think it's really cool the way this castle is designed. Some of them are really like ordinary, but some are like very placed, seemingly random, but I think they had their purpose. So another major update for the design is let's place some values and hues for the roof and also for that element below, made out of wood, I believe. And afterwards we can move on with the main buildings and the walls. Alright, so now we're getting serious. Notice how I'm changing the values of all the walls and the buildings, trying to pinpoint the proper value, and also there's going to be a really cool contrast happening here because the main tower is really has a very light value, quite a desaturated white, and it's the shadow side is going to be affected by the sky for sure, and it's going to be colder. And overall the plan is to have a very nice contrast happening over here where all the buildings around the main tower are going to be a darker value, also probably warmer in terms of color. It's going to create a nice contrast, so the viewer's eye is going to be you know, constantly drawn towards our main tower. First we're going to get rid of the orangey placeholder tone that we had, and now we're actually working on pinpointing the accurate values of the whole building. First things first, placing a very simple sort of like a textural wash on top of it, and then I'm working towards adding some value variation, right? Because we want to indicate that this wall is quite old and that there is some interesting details to it, but we also don't want to get too much into details, right? So it's just indicating textural information, indicating some wear and tear and things like that. Sometimes you want to zoom out so it looks nice from afar, it's not too noisy, you're not breaking your composition. And notice I'm doing it quite a lot of time, zooming in and sometimes flipping the image horizontally to just check for anomalies and something maybe that I missed. So I'm having like a couple of layers of textures, and then I'm adding some highlights, so a few accents, and constantly adjusting the value because I want to recreate a realistic lighting scenario. Some angles are pointed towards the light, some angles are facing away from the light, so you want to indicate that with the subtle value change. It doesn't have to be contrasty always. A lot of people are asking how I manage my layers. It just depends on how flexible you want to be with your painting, right? If you want to adjust or change things later on, then have them on separate layers, and that's going to help. If not, if you want to have more traditional painterly approach, let's say, and maybe you want to collapse everything and kind of commit to your decisions, then by all means have less layers in your image. But it's really a matter of choice. A lot of this image is all about these planes. If you let them be flat and boring, the whole image might not work. So I was really thinking how to add some interest to it, but not to break the value structure, right, and the composition. So we don't want to have a lot of noisy mess everywhere. After you spend some time on the buildings around the main tower, it's a good idea to come back and to make sure you've worked on some other details. Maybe some stuff is missing, so the areas in the shadow is kind of empty, so I'm thinking how to enrich the texture over there, like maybe add some hue variations, some color variation. That's always helping to make the image more believable and more interesting. And also the vegetation is a bit pale and kind of flat and boring, so with just a few brush strokes I kind of increased the contrast and added some highlights just to make things pop a little bit more. And overall I'm thinking that the next step should be, figuring out the background and the vegetation behind the castle, because it's kind of messy and not very well structured over there. So the first thing I wanted to do is to push back that layer with the greenery with just a transparent sort of like soft brush, added a bit more atmospheric depth, and then kind of trying to figure out what kind of clouds I want to have. And really nothing too fancy, just grab any brush you like when you're working with clouds, something soft, something maybe with a little bit of textures, so you can add that wispy feeling to the clouds here and there. I try to also stylize the clouds so it's not like a very realistic image, but very low contrast, because we want all the attention to be drawn towards our main tower. So behind it, it's going to have, the clouds are going to have soft edge and not too contrasty, so we can really emphasize our main tower. After you've been working for a couple of hours on the image, it's a good idea to step back for maybe like 20 minutes, because your eyes are getting used to it and you might miss some details and maybe you want to look at a bit of a fresh view. And lastly, to add another layer of polish to the image, I wanted to add minor architectural details here and there, like things that are sticking out on the roofs, maybe some textures here and there, like there are a couple of empty walls that was struggling throughout the image. If you notice, like the second biggest tower over there, it's kind of boring to me, so I will figure out how to improve the texture over there, and also kind of improving overall information throughout the whole image. Like the vegetation is also rough in some areas, so I'm usually taking a smudge brush and softening some edges where I wanna create some edge variation. Also, you can get the mixer brush and play with it a little bit too, to add some interesting shapes and textures with the trees and the greenery below the castle. Also there is this intricate framing in the building in front, and really you just create one segment. I did it a couple of times in previous videos. You create one segment and then you just copy, duplicate it and paste it according to the perspective, and also make sure it's not too contrasty, because again, we don't want to break the whole thing. The focal point is our main tower on top. Alright, let's have a look at the final image. So notice I've separated the planes a bit more. I've also added additional information in the vegetation, some color accents, and that's it. Thanks so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, it helps a lot. Thanks again so much, and I hope to see you in the next one, coming soon.